Ooh, hey, we're live.
Yes, we
Ish.
are. I'm just bringing up the comments. Okay. Oh. Welcome to Small Biz Life, episode 134. 5 ways you can do better. And oh boy, do we need this episode today. Thank you so much for bearing with us. If you are joining us live on Facebook, it's funny. We're starting about 25 minutes late because we were having issues with the software this morning, and so it's funny as we were like connecting and we were like, wow, we really needed this because today's episode is really about how you can do better in your life, how you can deal with things better, how you can bring a better, version of yourself to everything that you do. And, the reason that I've been thinking about this is because it's tax season. And typically during tax season, I get very short. Not with my clients, but with Jeff, with myself. I like lose all patience I have because I'm really busy. And so I started thinking about how I could do better. Do better with my health, do better with how I respond to things, just do better in general. And so we thought this would be a really good episode to do today.
And I just want to point out too, it's not just, sometimes about being too busy with a section in your life. I suffer from chronic pain. A lot of times I get short when I'm feeling bad. And to make it worse is I don't want to get help. And so there are ways we complicate this stuff ourselves. And that's, I think, kind of ultimately what we want to talk about is kind of how we get in our own way, and which holds us back from improving sometimes.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think sometimes we get so caught up, in all the stuff that we have to do and how we're frustrated and how we're angry and how we wish things didn't work. And I know that just happened to me 10 minutes ago. So we don't really sit down and kind of assess what's going on and really think about how we can do better. I think a lot of times we kind of sit there and we go, I didn't do that the right way. But when we're in the middle of it, we're not taking the time to say, is there something that I can do better? So that's what this whole episode is about.
Yeah, I think the worst mistake we make is we go, we need to change a whole bunch here. So we decide to do hundreds of hours of research and rip up everything, and try and start completely fresh. And in which case, it's not going to smoothly improve. It's going to be rough. It might end up getting better, or you might end up burning out and giving up altogether on trying the change, which I know, like when it comes to diet, that's happened to me several times. Or I start trying to exercise and I start getting knee pain and I get frustrated and I give up because I asked Kristin, it's probably because I was trained to exercise from the military. So like, I feel like I know what I'm doing, but the problem is when I was doing it back then, besides being younger, my knee was not damaged. My back was not damaged. My, every part of my body below my neck was not damaged. So, and above my neck has arguably been damaged, but that's a different kind of problem.
Yeah. And I think, for me, this is just about being more mindful, right? And so that's we're going to talk about 5 ways you can do better. And we're going to start with, I think this is the most important thing. That's why we're talking about this first. You have to assess what you have control over. There is a prayer that I learned very early in my life. I don't know if it's a Catholic thing. I don't know if it's an Irish thing, but I went to an Irish Catholic church and it was very pervasive all over the place. And it is, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I think where most of us have a lot of trouble is the wisdom to know the difference. We get so angry at things we cannot control. And rather than focusing on the things that we can control and trying to do better, we wallow in the things that we can't.
Mm-hmm. Yes. No, well, first I say that's, and I've heard you say that a few times over the years, and just out loud. Sometimes like you stop yourself and you actually just say it out loud as you're walking around the house being frustrated. And I like there's words of wisdoms in all of it, and it's something I learned very early when I started working a real job. Which is focus on the things that you can control and make changes there. You can get frustrated, and you're going to. Do it in your own time. When you go to the bathroom, pee extra hard. Whatever you want to do, take it out when you work out. I'm just coming up with stuff here, but
sure.
Focus on the things that you can control, because the thing is, even in a circumstance where you're maybe not at fault, and it's not about assessing fault ultimately, it's about changing your behavior so you can have a happier life ultimately. And it involves your work. It involves every aspect of things that you're working on.
Right. And that's the thing. So when I talk about assess what you can control, Jeff talked about how he has chronic pain. And so there are some times with that he gets into a funk. Okay. I cannot control his pain.
No.
I can make suggestions and try to prod him to do something about it. But even then, ultimately, there are times where he just gets really frustrated with it. And I have to understand that he's frustrated with it and he's doing everything he can, and there's nothing else we can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing that I have had to learn to accept. I can't control when the baby gets hungry. It just happens.
Cool.
When it happens, it would be cool, but I can't control that. We try to keep him on a schedule. And there were some times when, like this morning before we were trying to record, he was asleep at 9:30 when he was supposed to feed, and in those cases, we'll wake him up, we'll feed him the best we can, and right now he's chilling out in his crib. He's being awesome.
But
there are sometimes, yes, he is. But there are some times where it's like 9:00 and he's like, no, I want to eat at 9:00, not 9:30.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really care what you think schedule's supposed to be. And so, you've got to learn, that those are things you cannot control. I can control how I respond to those things, but that's the only thing I have control over.
Mm-hmm.
And it is amazingly it's so empowering when you successfully assess the things that you can control, you change the things that you can change, and you accept the things that you cannot. That is honestly one of the most empowering things that I've ever done in my life.
And I think the best thing is too, when you realize and focus on the things that you can control in the circumstance, you remove so many things from your to-do list. It's like to do, I know Kristen's going to get frustrated and tired. She works really hard at this time of year. I have to be understanding of that. I can't change that. I can do little things to try and help her out along the way, to try and alleviate some of those problems. I can do that. So, but the thing is, if I try and change her behavior, if I try and change who she is at that moment, I'm creating things on my to-do list that can never be done. So the thing is, I can actually alleviate my to-do list and put more useful things on there, like help out more with the laundry, feed the baby more than I was 2 months ago. Little things I can do like that, I know will help with her mindset, but there's something I can actually accomplish. Where I can't take away the stress of getting emails from the school or from clients, who are bombarding her with questions all at the same time. And because in work, we all have those moments. And we're all human. We're all going to get frustrated at certain times. And yeah, on our own, we can try and recognize when we're in that space and try and quickly find a way to get ourselves out of there. But, when we have to recognize too, when the people around us are stuck there, that there are things we can do, but just do the things that you can do, or else you have this to-do list that's impossible.
Yeah. Now, the second one, and I think some people, after we say, okay, assess what you can control, you can't control other people. And then number two, we say you need to set expectations. And a lot of people say, well, if I can't control other people, how do I set expectations? When you set expectations, you are setting how you are going to respond when someone else does something. So, for example, you can set the expectation that you do not check your email, your text messages, or accept phone calls from clients after 5 p.m. Now, that does not mean that they are going to stop calling you, emailing you, and texting you incessantly after 5 o'clock. But you can set the expectation that you're not going to respond. I put up, I don't like away messages, but I put up an away message for the next 2 weeks on my CPA firm email address, that says, hey, I hate autoresponders, but sometimes there's a really good reason to have one. As you know, this is crunch time, and I'm doing my best to get everybody's work done. But in order to do that, I need to stay out of my email. So I will get back to you, but it's going to take me a little bit longer than normal. I know you'll understand. Thanks so much. And that's going out now to, that's my autoresponder. I'm setting expectations that, yes, you might be emailing me asking when your tax return is going to be done. That is not helping me get your tax return done.
Yeah. Well, I remember too, like from a work standpoint, how frustrating it is. Like I ran into all of this years ago when I was working for a very large company, and you'd always get that where they would come up at the last minute with something to do because they forgot to tell you probably months ago when they knew, and they need you to get done. So they send like, you better drop everything, go do this right now. And then all of a sudden you get those phone calls every 5 minutes. And, sometimes, even in those, if you're working those jobs, you have to have the bravery to say, hey, I'm working through this. Here's my expectation. Maybe I'll send you an email at the end of the day. You need to come up with a mechanism that works for you and ultimately your clients that says, what can they expect and when can they expect it? And, the good thing is when you're the boss of your own company, you get to set those expectations.
Right. And set expectations for yourself as well. Typically when we decide that we want to be better, we will go from, hey, I haven't worked out in 5 years, to I'm going to work out 3 hours every day. That is not a realistic expectation for yourself.
Yeah.
First of all, you got to talk to your doctor and see what your doctor says that you can do. But, set a reasonable expectation for how you are going to create change, for how you are going to do better. Because it can't just be 0 to 200.
Yes.
There's got to be something in between. And, it's interesting because I have a lot of friends and a lot of clients who are very devout Christians, who I've heard say many times that the only being that is perfect is God. But yet will get so pissed off with themselves if there is an error in something that they do, if they find a typo on their website, if, there's the picture isn't exactly, centered, it's a pixel off. I mean, it's funny because it's like we set these unrealistic expectations for what we are going to do, for deadlines that we set. And I would just ask, that you look at and say, okay, I've assessed what I can control. Can I really control these things? And then are my expectations realistic? Because I think it's people dreams with expectations. Either they don't have any or they have ones that are just insane.
And I know that's one that will really get to me, especially if I have other baggage, like I'm in pain a lot, and then I find an error where something didn't get published correctly online, or I've accidentally published the wrong podcast in the wrong show, which never happens. But when it does, it's when I'm at my maximum pain, and then I get frustrated at myself, and I will beat myself. Ask Kristin. When I get frustrated, I don't get frustrated too often with other people, but I will beat the crap out of myself. And a lot of times it's stuff beyond control, So, some stuff, you can put things in order to make sure they don't happen. But ultimately, we have to remember that no matter what you believe spiritually, humans are not perfect, and there will be mistakes. The question is, how do we respond to them?
Yeah, absolutely. The next one is be present. It's funny because when you become a new parent, you sit there and go, okay, I'm feeding the baby. So while I'm feeding the baby, that only requires one hand. So I am going to use my other hand to, email from my phone, to text message, to read articles, to read a book, to do anything but pay attention to the baby eating. And typically when you do that, you'll miss one of two things. You'll either miss the baby puke all over himself, okay? Or you will miss your baby looking at you with the most amazing love that you have ever seen. And so it is very important in all aspects of your life to be present.
Yeah.
Because you will either miss things that are very important that you need to take care of, or you will miss the wonderful things in life that are right in front of you.
Yeah. Well, that's perfect. There's no brilliance I can add to that, but to say how true it is, and it's be mindful of the task at hand. So whether you're feeding your kid or you're responding to a client via email, the task you're working on should be the task you're working on. The biggest lie we tell ourselves is we can multitask, and yes, we use different screens, but we're doing one thing at a time on a screen. And the reason we use multiple screens is so we save ourselves time, shifting between tasks that are closely connected. So have the expectation for yourself that you can really only do one thing at one time, and do it. If you don't like it, it helps you get through it faster. And when it's something like your kid feeding, he's not covered in vomit, looking at you with love, learning a bad behavior from you.
Right. And that's the thing. And it's funny because people ask me like, oh, you've got 3 screens, you must be able to, you're multitasking. My 3 screens when I'm working on taxes would be, I've got the tax software open on one screen. I typically have QuickBooks Online open on a second screen, and I have my client's digital documents on the third. So I am working on one client at a time, right? But I need 3 screens in order to have all their stuff open.
There's just so much information, and she doesn't have to spend the time to open up a tab and then switch tabs and then get the information, and then go back and then maybe forget the information. So there are benefits to doing stuff like that, but as long as you're working on one task, if you're trying to say, like, if I was to have one screen where I'm editing the podcast and another screen where I'm creating new web pages, I'm not going to do either one of those 2 tasks well.
Yeah, exactly. So just make sure, that when you're working on something, what I kind of do is I make sure, like, am I thinking about what I'm actually working on, or am I thinking about the next thing I have to do? It's one of those things where you just have to know how your own brain works, and you have to know what you can focus on and how often you need to make sure. And this is another thing that we're going to talk about, but how often do you have to check in with yourself to make sure that you're doing okay? Multiple screens is like having papers laid out on a desk. We're just not doing many tasks on paper anymore. No, that's completely true. That's Sin Hendricks from the Pharmacist Answers podcast, who's actually watching us as we're recording this live. Hey, Sin, it's good to see you. She's also the official note taker for the Small Biz podcast. Yeah, so you should check it out. Sin Hendricks is a pharmacist, and her podcast is amazing. It is a wealth of knowledge, and so you should definitely go check it out. Pharmacist Answers. Thanks, Sin, for checking in.
I love the analogy.
So, yeah, no, absolutely. And that's really the thing is, like, in my office, we're completely paperless. So my clients are sending me their documents digitally. And so for me to be able to see them, I have to have a screen that's basically dedicated just to that, just to having those documents up. The same thing, like when I'm doing banking stuff, we don't get statements. So I need that screen for that. Okay, so number 4. So remember, we've said number 1, assess what you can control. Number 2, set expectations. Number 3, be present. And number 4, make small changes. Because, often what happens is when we're trying to we're trying to do better, we try to go from, wherever we are to perfection. And we've already said perfection isn't possible. But I think a lot of times what happens, it's funny because we've just started the second quarter. Most people that set resolutions or goals for the year, typically before the end of January, they've given up on them.
Yes.
So at this point, you might be considering setting your second round of goals. But I would just ask you that if you're going to do that, put in very small changes.
Mm-hmm.
And so kind of the thing that I do throughout the course of the day, and this was actually the impetus for this episode, is I will ask, okay, how can I do a little bit better than what I'm doing right now? So after I had the baby, I was on a really strict diet because I had gestational diabetes. So I was on a really strict diet during pretty much the entire pregnancy. And so after that was over, I was like, okay, there are a couple things that I haven't been able to eat in 7 months, and I'd like to be able to eat those things. Well, I didn't eat great for probably 4 or 5 weeks after having the baby. And so, so I gained a little bit of weight, which had been really good during the pregnancy. We had walked during the pregnancy, but that was it. And then towards the end, I wasn't allowed to do that. So, I was trying to go from like 0 to trying to get some semblance of getting back into shape. And, I couldn't go back on the elliptical for 60 minutes because it'd been so long since I had done that. It's probably been 10 years since I've gone on the elliptical for 60 minutes. So I'm like, I'm going to do 15 minutes, 5 days a week. And if I can do that, I'd be really happy with that. And I am. I'm like, I'm really happy with getting that 15 minutes and I feel better. With my diet, one thing I do, and I shared a picture in the Small Biz Life community of the omelet that I eat every morning. And it's just a 2-egg omelet with spinach and mushrooms and red onions and Swiss cheese, and then either turkey sausage or a little bit of like crumbled up bacon. If I eat that and a piece of fruit, I've eaten all my fruits and vegetables for the day. And so even if I don't get any more vegetables because I'm having a bad day and it's tax season, I know that I got that in first thing in the morning. And I can't tell you, just making that small change, how much better I feel every day.
Or the amount of energy you have, more sustained during the day as well, too, because you get the protein and a lot of the nutrients, so it's definitely noticeable from my end, and for me, where I'm a person where I don't like wasting my energy for decisions on silly things. It's like, I've come to compromise with eating where I'll do the one plate thing where, I try and eat vegetables, protein and some carbohydrates, but try and limit it to one plate. And, I try and split my plate. So I know that, I'm getting a little bit of well-rounded. I'm eating much more vegetables than I ever would. But sometimes if there are potato chips, there's going to be potato chips because that's me. There's certain things about Jeffrey. He's going to eat foods he likes. He's going to sometimes be a bit inappropriate. That's just Jeffrey. I can't change those things about me. So I try and work within them.
Mm-hmm. But that's the thing. It's small changes that become sustainable. It's when you try to make massive change that your brain and your body really react. And usually it's in a negative way.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. So, if you make small changes become habits, habits become sustainable. Okay?
And there's some evidence too, especially in nutrition now, that's showing if you make too many radical changes at one time for diet, your body's metabolism shifts to try and compensate. So, I'm definitely not an expert in these areas, but I would definitely be trying to coordinate if I'm trying to make lots of changes at once to ensure my metabolism doesn't lower down. And then all of a sudden I have to do more radical things to try and keep getting any benefit or maintaining what I gained.
Yep. So small changes. Okay. So now number 5. So we said number 1 is assess what you can control. Number 2, set expectations. Number 3, be present. Number 4, make small changes. And number 5, check in with yourself on a regular basis. This is something that we use. I think we've talked about it before on the podcast. Setting alarms for yourself, creating triggers for yourself. But basically, what you want to do is you want to find a way to check in with yourself mentally multiple times a day. So that could be, looking at, like when I make a meal or when I start thinking about a meal, I ask myself, is there one thing that I could do better? Can I reduce the fat on this? Can I put whole grains in it? Can I add vegetables to it? What's one thing that I could do to do this better? When I'm spending time with Eric, I try to, put down my phone. How can I do better? It's really about, going back to kind of being present, right? Being in the moment and not getting so caught up in what you're doing, because I used to use that as an excuse. Well, I'm so busy that I forget to drink water. I'm so busy that I forget to eat. I'm so busy that I forget to check in with people. Those are excuses. And those are because I was not putting the proper triggers in place or the proper reminders in place. Because it's funny, because with the baby, in my phone, I have an alarm that goes off every time the baby's supposed to get fed, if he hasn't already decided he wanted to get fed, right? Because you can't control his schedule. But I have an alarm that goes off to hey, feed the baby. You can have alarms for water. My Fitbit goes off if I haven't had 250 steps in an hour. You can build things in to help you do better. So
my favorite triggers are doorways. Using doorways. So whenever I pass through a doorway, try and think of something. So if you're a parent, a great one is every time you walk through a doorway, think about the first time your baby really smiled at you. See Kristen's reaction? That's probably what's going to come across your face, and then, so what happens instinctually is whenever you go through a doorway, after a while, you just start feeling like that baby smiling at you the first time, which is just, I had no clue until I had a baby. But there are other things that you can do where you have that moment where you feel just amazing. Use those moments in your present to power you through, because it'll help sustain you. Because you know what? If you get that feeling, think about it, if you get that feeling every time you go through a doorway, how many times do you go through a doorway a day? How much more energy could you have just by feeling that rush of joy?
Well, and that's, one thing, it's funny because I do that with the elliptical. So our elliptical has a power button, and when you turn it on, it makes this like high pitched beeping noise. What I've done is I equate, when I hear that noise, I think about how good I feel when I get off the elliptical, because I hate being on the elliptical, but it's cold, and it's, we kind of use, it's cold and that we can't work out because it's cold. Really?
It's a great excuse in New England.
Yeah, it's a great excuse in New England, because yesterday was April 2nd and it snowed. So, we could use that excuse probably till June. But it's funny because I've trained myself that when I hear that beep, instead of thinking, oh God, I'm going to get on the elliptical, I think I feel great when I get off the elliptical. And so that has changed my whole mindset. And now I get excited when I hear that sound. When I used to be like, oh, here we go, we're getting on the elliptical. So, triggers that you set, alarms that you set can be very powerful things. And so you should try to use those. You know what your weaknesses are. The areas where you need some support in doing better. So figure out what those are and figure out how you can use either technology, or even accountability partners to help you do what you need to do.
And remember, if you're an HQ member, if you go to April, I love talking about April 2017. We have a whole month with different little techniques and a little bit more detail on how to do the triggers and how to use your happy words, and how I would have thought they were silly before March of that year, but now I'm a believer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, April 2017 is all about triggers and mindset. And if you're an HQ member, you get access to the entire back catalog. So you get access to all of the trainings that we've done since January of 17. The other cool thing, is I was talking to an HQ member a couple weeks ago, and she said, when I talk to people about Small Biz HQ, the thing I always say is, where else for $49 a month can you get access to an IT professional and a CPA to ask them questions? Because if you post a question in the group, we will find you an answer. And so I think a lot of people find value just in that. If I've got a tax question, a money question, an IT question, I know I can post it up and I'm at least going to get a response from them. And you're probably going to get a response from other members of the community as well.
Yeah, usually if we don't respond, it's because someone's nailed it already. Because I mean, we have a lot of experienced people who are very good at either figuring out solutions or they've lived it. So it's the great thing about having that community of small business people.
Yeah. So if you're interested in learning more about Small Biz HQ, you can go to smallbizlife.com/HQ. Okay. And you can check that out. So thank you so much for joining us again this week. We hope that you will strive to do better. Have a great week.